Welcome to Canadian Passages, a project that brings history to life with audio versions of archival material. These audiograms use digital voices to make historical writings accessible anytime, anywhere. The materials in this series come from the archives of the Canadian Forces Base Esquimalt, Naval and Military Museum. Please be warned that this content may contain language considered inappropriate by today's standards. The material is a product of its time and represents the context of the era, as well as the attitudes and opinions of those who created it. In the interests of historical integrity, editing has been done for clarity or brevity only, rather than for censorship. Patrick Willett Brock, or PWB, was born December 30, 1902, in Kingston, Ontario. He and his family moved to Vancouver in 1911 when his father became a professor at the University of British Columbia. In 1917, at age 14, PWB enrolled in Canada's Royal Naval College, and moved into the Royal Canadian Navy in 1920 as a midshipman. With the downsizing of Canada's naval service in 1921, he was forced to transfer to the Royal Navy, where he was nicknamed Canada Brock. Over the next 4 decades, he rose to Rear Admiral, one of only a few Canadians to achieve that rank. A prominent member of the naval community during his life, Rear Admiral Brock has been largely forgotten since his death in 1988. PWB was an avid writer throughout his life, and a collection of his letters, essays, and diaries are in the archives of the CFB Esquimalt Museum. These writings include first-hand accounts of major events of the 20th century, as well as the routine life of a Navy officer. On the 6th of December 1917, 2 ships collided in the Halifax harbor and caught fire. With the Great War raging in Europe, supply ships left Halifax on a daily basis. On that fateful day, SS Mont-Blanc, a French cargo ship, was fully loaded with high explosives, including TNT, picric acid, benzol, and guncotton, bound for the battlefields of the front. The SS Emo, a Norwegian relief vessel, was leaving for New York to collect supplies for occupied Belgium. Through a series of miscommunications and traffic errors in the tight narrows, the 2 ships found themselves on a collision course. Just after 8:30 a.m., the Emo struck the Mont-Blanc. While the impact itself was not catastrophic, the Emo reversed its engines to pull away. The grinding metal created sparks that ignited the highly flammable benzol on the Mont-Blanc. The burning vessel drifted toward the Halifax shore, attracting crowds of spectators unaware of the danger. A few minutes after 9 a.m., the fire reached the main cargo hold, triggering a detonation of 2.9 kilotons of explosives. The blast flattened everything within a 2.5-kilometer radius, and the shockwave was felt hundreds of kilometers away. The force of the explosion temporarily displaced the water in the harbor, creating an 18-meter or 60-foot-high tsunami that wiped out a whole community. On that December morning, Patrick Willett Brock was a 14-year-old cadet at the Naval College, located on the Halifax harbor. PWB recounted this historic event in journals he kept throughout his years at the Naval College. Copies of these journals are in the collections of CFB Esquimalt Museum. But the originals are owned by the Royal Military College Library in Kingston, Ontario, and we thank them for providing scanned digital versions for our use.
Our term-end examinations were to begin on Thursday, December 6, 1917. So for days beforehand, everyone was working hard, preparing for the ordeal. At last the day arrived and a good many of us were trying to cram a few last points in number 8 building, when someone looking out of the window noticed great clouds of smoke rolling up from behind the mass of the sugar refinery, and a ship on fire in midstream. Everyone left his book to watch this remarkable sight. As we learned later, the Belgian relief steamer Emo had rammed the munitions ship Mont-Blanc. Both had caught fire and were burning furiously. It was the Mont-Blanc inshore behind the refinery sending up much smoke from the picric acid stowed forward. The Emo was on fire in the stream. This was about 8:40 a.m. For 20 minutes we watched. At 9, the warning gong sounded, and we went to our gun rooms to brush for divisions. Fortunately for us, our gun room was on the landward side. No one knew that the ship contained explosives, and many people were watching her. The Niobe sent her steamboat out to lend assistance. Unfortunately, just as the boat drew near, at 9:08 a.m., The 4,000 tons of explosives, which the Mont-Blanc carried, blew up with a tremendous roar. The boat was of course lost with all hands. The walls of our building shook and a shower of glass and plaster followed. I had been looking over a newspaper with the far right side of my face towards the windows. I was hit by several pieces of glass. For a few seconds I was dazed. Explosions were not at all in the usual run of things. Then I dashed along the hall through the rain of plaster and out the door which had been laid flat. When I reached the lawn I threw myself on my face. Whether from instinct or from subconsciously following the example of others I do not know. For a few moments I lay there, feeling, rather than seeing, that there were others around doing the same thing. There were large quantities of dust, pieces of plate, and other debris whizzing through the air, and they caused me to wonder if the Germans were raiding the town. A large piece of boilerplate crashed through the roof of Study 8. I thought that it would not be long before the Germans got the college.
Before learning the ship that was on fire carried explosives, Brock assumed they were under attack by the Germans. In December 1917, the idea of a German attack on Halifax was not just wartime paranoia, it was a highly logical conclusion for a naval cadet witnessing such destruction. Halifax was arguably the most important strategic port in North America, serving as the funnel through which the British Empire's supplies flowed. By 1917, Germany had declared unrestricted submarine warfare, meaning they would sink any ship, military or civilian, without warning. A naval cadet would have known the damage a single torpedo could cause. While most U-boat activity was closer to Europe in 1917, the threat to the Canadian coast was considered imminent.
To the northward, a gigantic cloud of smoke was slowly rising into the air. It was a clear Indian summer day, and the great fleecy mass, rising and rising, was visible in every part of the city for over a quarter of an hour. Presently, the noise being somewhat lessened, I got up and went out the dockyard gate, perhaps intending to go into the city. The gate overlooks the railway tracks and station. Both were in a very bad state. The roof of the station had fallen in, and the cars in the yard were badly damaged. The yard north of the bridge was totally wrecked, and as one went north, totally wrecked is absolutely inadequate to convey an idea of the wreckage that had once been cars and locomotives. After taking this in, I realized that I ought to return. All the staff and cadets had got out of the college. None of my term was seriously hurt, though, with one or two exceptions, everyone had been hit by splinters of glass which made nasty gashes, and the blood was simply pouring down until all our faces were stained a deep red. At this time, I was chiefly conscious of a wild desire to laugh. The spectacle seemed so curious. Yet it was a ghastly sight too to see the fellows one new dripping blood. All the injuries looked much worse than they really were. It was some time before I could realize that it was not merely a nightmare. Our term got off very lightly owing to our gunroom being on the west side, but the senior gunroom being on the opposite side of the building, the seniors received many more injuries than we. Mr. Howley ordered all those of us who were not badly injured to help the others to sick quarters farther down the dockyard, or to the naval hospital. Both were badly damaged, so the wounded had to wait until ambulances, automobiles or carts were provided. It was indeed surprising, considering the magnitude of the catastrophe, how quickly relief came. Of course it was not nearly adequate at first, but for the size of the city it was remarkable. In spite of the grim tragedy, there were yet one or two that were humorous. One fellow who had been out of sorts all morning was standing on the table when the accident happened and was blown out of the window to the ground. As soon as he picked himself up, his good humor was restored. He had been punished that morning for breaking a picture, so immediately went to our dormitory and broke the remaining pictures, by way of revenge. After the people who had been hurt had been taken to hospitals and to the houses of friends, we others entered the building. The building was a horrible mess. The floors were covered a foot deep with plaster, glass, woodwork, papers, and countless fragments no longer recognizable. Window panes and sashes had been blown in, and small fragments of glass were scattered everywhere. The partition walls were greatly shaken and several were leaning at angles which made it doubtful if they would stand. The wall of our gunroom was in this condition, while that of the seniors was leaning against the opposite one. The new wing, which was nearest the north, suffered most severely. The floor of the quarterdeck had collapsed and the roof was unsafe. The contents of our lockers and desks had been shot out on the floor, so that it was an exceedingly difficult task to retrieve our own books and instruments from the other wreckage with which the deck was covered. The desks in Study 8 were in many cases upset and wrecked. It was very lucky for us that the explosion did not take place 5 minutes later, or 5 minutes earlier, for if we had all been in the classroom, then in no doubt we would have suffered much more than we did. The building was so much damaged that it was condemned for use. After a preliminary look-see, we all began leisurely to collect our own and other people's goods from the gunroom floor and from our sea chests. We all lugged down our trunks and bags from above and started to cram our belongings into them. We were in no hurry to get through and left our packing at times to explore the damaged building or exult over the fact that the examinations were not going to come off.
The Royal Naval College was housed in the old Naval Hospital within the Halifax dockyard, and while the building was not at the absolute epicenter of the explosion, it was situated well within the high-impact zone. Although the structural walls and roof of the building remained standing, the interior was completely gutted by the blast wave. Windows were shattered instantly, sending lethal glass rain through the dormitories and classrooms. Doors were blown off hinges, and ceilings collapsed. The damage was so severe that the building was immediately declared uninhabitable for the cadets and staff. Despite the building's ruin, the loss of life among the students was miraculously low, though the injuries were gruesome. There were no immediate fatalities among the cadets, but several were maimed or permanently blinded by flying glass. The Naval Academy was only one small corner of Halifax that was affected by the disaster, and PWB wrote about what he experienced both inside and outside the college that day.
Halifax is, almost without exception, made up of wooden houses. And at that time in the morning, there were hundreds of fires in stoves and grates. And consequently, when the wooden wreckage came crashing down, scores of fires broke out in the ruins. Not long after the explosion, there was a rumor that the magazine near the college was on fire and might be expected to explode any minute. This report spread all over the city and we were ordered to quit the building and seek shelter in the open. The speed with which this rumor spread was simply wonderful. The same was true of the cause of the disaster, for not long after it had occurred, we knew what had happened. And soon everyone in the city knew. When the order to leave was given, I snatched up my civvy cap which I had unearthed from the depths of my trunk. I must have looked funny in my filthy blood-stained uniform and wrinkled civvy cap, but there were many others in similar condition. I did not worry about appearances but dashed down the dockyard road. I passed a large number of officers and men. Captains, commanders, lieutenants, stokers, and seamen, all excited and confused. We ran, stopping now and then in an open space, exchanging a word or two, leaving one friend and falling in with another. At last I left the dockyard by the south gate. My thoughts were with my money and my valise, which I had left in the dormitory, for I wondered how I should get home with nothing left in the world. Presently we reached the citadel. Thousands of people were gathered on the hill, old men and women, children, girls and men, all awaiting the explosion which never came. They must have waited for nearly 2 hours, when to their great relief, soldiers and trucks came round announcing that the danger was over. Nearly everyone had some cuts from the glass which caused a great part of the injuries in the houses which were not actually destroyed and which blinded so many. From the summit of the Citadel Hill we saw a great sight. The day was beautiful, clear and cool, bright and sunny. Below the houses of the city, every ship in the harbor was under way. Steamers, schooners, sailboats, and most of the Canadian Navy. The white sails of the small boats and ships were beautiful against the blue of the water and the green of the Dartmouth hills. To the north, the devastated area was hidden by buildings and by smoke and flames from the fires raging about the graving dock. Presently it was announced that all danger of a second explosion was over. Then we returned to the college, after having washed up a little. On the way I met several fellows in my term and we compared notes of the disaster and the incidents connected with it. I then completed my packing and had some lunch in the senior gunroom. It was only bread, cheese and milk, but I was very glad to get it. In the afternoon, we were told to find billets for ourselves. I went to my friends, the Robertsons, where I spent the next few days. The explosion killed 1,200, injured seriously 3,000, and destroyed the home of 6,000, as well as doing damage to property considerably over $50 million. These figures give an idea of the extent of the catastrophe, and it can be seen that everyone had to help. Every large building was turned into a hospital. All those who had any medical experience rendered assistance. Mr. King, the chief petty officer of our term, had a terrible experience. He had been watching the fire when the explosion occurred, and he was very dangerously hurt. He was taken away in a cart unconscious, and was thought to be dead. The explosion took place on Thursday. Until Saturday he remained unconscious, lying among the hundreds of dead in the morgue. On Saturday, he felt a man lift the cloth that covered him and say, "No, that's not him," and passed on. Mr. King was too weak to attract his attention. Once he heard footsteps, but they passed away again. At last he succeeded in attracting attention of a passing man and was taken to hospital.
PWB had pasted a newspaper clipping into his journal that covered CPO King's ordeal. The headline read, "Lay in morgue 2 days." In the article, King is quoted as saying that as he came to life, he prayed, "Now God, you have helped me before, help me now to help myself." And when the footsteps approached, I grabbed in the dark and caught the ankles of a man. He gave an awful shout.
There was, of course, great confusion for a while. Nearly every window in the city was broken, and there was a great rush on the hardware stores for tarred paper to stop the windows. No stores were carrying on that day except the hardware stores, the drug stores, and the corner groceries, which were soon selling the necessities of life. There were few luxuries for anyone in Halifax. Everyone who could was helping in the work of relief, providing food, clothing, shelter, and medical relief for the unfortunates. These were made even more necessary by the bitter snowstorm which raged that night and all Friday. In the afternoon, the work of searching the ruins began, and carts and trucks bearing their freight of lifeless bodies and injured men, women, and children made their way south from the ruined district. Committees to look after the food and clothing for the sufferers were formed. Every house that remained sheltered some unfortunates, including us. Parties of Marines patrolled the streets to prevent looting, and engineers were assembled for work in the North End. Outside points were most generous in their aid. As soon as possible, the injured were sent by train to Truro and other points, where the citizens were most kind to the sufferers. The way in which the United States sent their aid was very generous. Relief trains and ships were dispatched. Until Monday, I was at my friends the Robertsons for a time. I acted as a messenger in the city hall, but most of the time I spent in trying to get my warrant for my railway ticket. I made several weary trips, but at last I got it on Sunday night, and I walked happily back down the middle of Barrington Street. Early Monday morning I left the Robertsons and made my way to the station. There were a number of people there, all eager to take the first train out. The train was supposed to leave at 8 a.m. but did not leave till 9 or a few minutes after, when it slowly pulled out of the damaged station, where men were still at work clearing the debris, past the dockyard, past ruined cars, past the blue waters of the Narrows, and through the desolate North End. The damage here was complete. The ground was, as a major remarked, in the condition of land under shell fire for a month. One could scarcely tell that there had been houses there. Finally, the houses we passed were standing, but less and less damaged, until we drew in clear, clean country. So I left Halifax, which had a few pleasant memories, many drab ones, some unpleasant ones, and several scarlet ones. The poor cleaner on the lawn rocking to and fro, shrieking, my God, I'm blinded," Mr. King with a sack over his face to hide the ruin that was once his head, being led staggering down the road by 2 cadets. Several lifeless heaps lying in a motor truck. All these I left, and they gradually faded away into the limbo of past events.
Highlights of Canada Brock's career include being a Navy cadet at the Halifax explosion of 1917. A junior officer on HMS Vindictive at the China Station at the start of the Chinese Civil War in the 1920s. Torpedo officer in the Mediterranean during the 1930s. Royal Navy Admiralty staff at the start of the Second World War. Executive officer on HMS Mauritius at the Sicily and D-Day landings. Senior naval officer at Schleswig-Holstein in post-war Germany. Captain of the HMS Kenya during the Korean War. And flag officer for the Middle East in the 1950s. Forced into retirement in 1958, Rear Admiral Brock became a maritime historian, authoring many essays and co-authoring the book, Steam and Sail, in Britain and North America. But he never wrote his biography. Thankfully, some of his story survived in letters, essays, diaries, and photographs. Museums and archives offer a wealth of primary sources such as those featured in this audiogram. These materials provide a spotlight on historical events and social history not found elsewhere. Letters and diaries, particularly, offer personal insights into the past. The Canadian Passages Project hopes to make unique materials held by CFB Esquimalt Museum more accessible to audiences around the world. This audiogram was produced by K.M. Lowe in collaboration with CFB Esquimalt Naval and Military Museum, which, unless otherwise noted, holds all rights to the original materials. This content, including but not limited to recordings, commentary, and images, is protected by Canadian and international copyright laws. All rights are reserved. No part of this production may be reproduced, distributed, or transmitted without prior written permission from the copyright holder, but links to the official version may be shared. For more information on this project, please visit canadianpassages.ca. Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe for more content like this.